What's going on, everyone? Welcome to another edition of the Quality Talks podcast. We've been a little bit quiet over the last sort of few weeks. Summer has been here. We've all been taking a lovely break. But we're back. We're bigger than ever. We're stepping into a brand new chapter for the podcast. So we've been going for roughly about 2.5 years, well over 50 odd episodes now in the books. It's time for a little bit of a shake up, right? I mean, me and Chris kicked this off, as I say, 2.5 years ago. And the reason we did that was because we just enjoyed talking to each other. We thought, well, if we enjoy talking to each other, then there must be some people out there that like the sound of our voices. But obviously Chris hasn't been around for a while. So he's had a lot going on, starting a new role. So we've had a little bit of conversation and we said we'd shake things up a little bit. Don't worry. The big Geordie bear is still going to be around. Okay. So he's not going anywhere. He'll be dipping in and out as and when he can. But we're going to have somebody new joining us on the show as a new co-host. Now, there is a rule. There seems to be this rule that if you're going to be a co-host on this show, your name has to be Chris. Okay. And our new co-host just so happens to be another Chris, somebody that you may have seen previously on one of our other episodes. But I'm not going to say too much more because I'm just going to introduce the guy because he's amazing. And I'm so looking forward to him being part of this journey moving forward as we continue into this next chapter. Welcome to the show, Chris. Welcome to the team, my friend. How are you doing?
Hi, Stu. It is indeed great to be here and absolutely thrilled to be part of the Quality Talks podcast team now. Been a fan of the show since the beginning, so to be part of it is fantastic. It really is.
Yeah, and I'm so happy to have you here. And everybody, we've got Chris Pratt joining us, and this is the most important Chris Pratt in the world, right? There's that other one that you may know from Hollywood. Didn't even bother with him, right? We've got the real deal here, right, Chris?
That's it. I mean, I must admit, Stu, when the email came through that you were after me to join the podcast, I did look at that and go, no, this is one of these emails that's supposed to go to that other Chris Pratt, isn't it? I'm sure that's where it was meant to go. But no, it was little old me that you chose. So you could have had anyone. You could have had a big Hollywood star, but you've gone for me. And I'm very grateful of that. So, yeah, it's good to be part of the team.
Yeah, it's great to have you on board, my friend. And yeah, it's gonna be great because obviously, as I said, obviously Chris, the other Chris, hasn't been around for a bit. So it's gonna be nice to be able to share the load between the three of us moving forward, and get some real good conversations flowing back in and such like. So, but obviously you've been on the show before, Chris. You've been a fan, as you've said. There might be some people that haven't listened to that episode, which if they haven't, I mean, I think we should just shoot them down right now, right? We should name and shame them. But for those that maybe those that haven't listened to that episode, do you want to just introduce yourself more broadly to your audience now, right? To your audience on the show.
Yeah, absolutely, Stu. So the previous episode I was on was, I think, February time, and that was called Bump, Bump. Surely there's another way. It was an episode inspired by Winnie the Pooh, of all people. But yes, if you don't know me, I've been around the testing world for about a decade. I've got a broader sort of engineering background. Before that, I was in consulting, more broad sort of engineering consulting before I moved into testing. And kind of, yeah, on the theme of new chapters, I started a new role a few months ago, and that's my first, I'd say, leadership role within a software company. So I've had sort of senior roles when I was doing the consulting work, but this is my first sort of leadership role within a software company directly, which is very exciting, and it obviously brings its own sets of challenges.
Yeah, and we're gonna dive deep into that because obviously I've started a new role recently as well. Geordie Chris, he's also recently joined a new role as well, which is again why he's not had the sort of the time to necessarily commit to the show. So we're gonna delve into that and delve into that sort of journey that we've all been on. over the last few months. But this is going to be a little bit of a mini series. Actually, we were sort of saying like, there's a few people out there that we know that have recently started new chapters in their careers. So over the sort of the coming episodes, we're going to have a few different people join us to talk about what does that mean to them, and how have they sort of navigated those new roles, those new journeys, and so forth. And if you are in that sort of place at the moment where you're either looking to embark on a new chapter, or you're starting a new chapter, or maybe with the industry the way it is at the moment, there's a lot of people sort of being forced into having to look for new roles and start new chapters. Hopefully over the next few episodes that we do, it will sort of help kind of align some of that thinking, but also bring a little bit of guidance around what you can do in these situations to get more comfortable and um, start adding value from day one in different ways for different roles. So yeah, so I'm excited for this little series that we're going to do. I don't know about you, Chris.
No, absolutely. It's a really interesting topic to talk about, and I think as you touched on there, a really good starting place has got to be around actually getting these roles in the first place, and perhaps even we start thinking a bit about intent as well, because as you know, it's quite challenging in the market out there at the moment. So I think a lot of a good place to start is to think about what we actually want. And that's something that I started thinking about, not just, a few months ago as I was looking towards this particular role, but I think actually I can trace back to about, I would say 2019, 7 years ago perhaps, when I was actually at a particular point in my career and I was really starting to think, what do I really want? Okay, what do I really want out of my ideal role? And for me, that started with thinking about those things. And I did some work with someone who was a life coach. It was someone I actually met. I was doing some testing training, and she very craftily at the start of the course mentioned that she runs her own business doing coaching. And I sort of went away lunchtime, looked at it, I thought, this is quite interesting, because I was feeling stuck. Okay, so I'm just sort of putting this out there for all the people who are sort of in roles and they're just feeling stuck, and they've been pushing forward and they're trying to make progress, and for whatever reason we can't. And that was the position I was in. The lady I spoke to, Karen Peters, I'll put a link in the show notes, but has really, really helped me. And at the time actually, we were working with laws of attraction, and I know it's easy to criticize, but for me, it actually worked. I got really good value from it. But it's worth thinking about why and how that worked for me, because it's not magic. I think there's a bit more to it than that. But yeah, I'm quite happy to sort of start digging into that process and kind of what I did at that time and what I did when I was working with Karen. But I know, Stu, you've got a sort of a similar approach as well, because we've talked about this before around thinking about, the ideal role and what that might be.
Yeah, and of like you say, we've spoken about it, and I do a lot of sort of coaching and mentoring outside of the day job, and that's kind of what we've been doing, isn't it, Chris? In terms of like how we've got to know each other a lot more, and the sort of our conversations have grown over time. For anybody that doesn't know, right? So me and Chris will catch up maybe once every 3-4 weeks. Is that right, Chris? And then we tend to go over the allotted time, let's say, quite
yes,
a bit, because our conversations seem to flow into all different sort of angles. But yeah, I think that sort of the advice I've been giving to people, or the guidance I've been giving to people, is really trying to understand or reflect on what is important to you in a role generally. Because we do get caught up, we're in a role and we get caught up in the what's happening. And sometimes it's hard to see, am I feeling, like you say, am I feeling stuck because the role's not right for me, or is there other factors at play, and these sort of things. So one of the things I've sort of guided people to do is just take some time to sort of reflect and sort of say, okay, write down all the things that you think you want from a role, right? It can be anything, right? It can be fruit in a fruit bowl. It doesn't really matter. It's like, what are the things that are important to you in some way, shape, or form, right? And then allow that to sort of brew for a little bit, like a good tea and or whatever, allow it to brew. And then come back to that list and then ask yourself, okay, so now what's really important to me? So you've written this sort of list down of all these different things, and then sort of not necessarily prioritize it, but ask yourself the same question again. What is really important to me? And then same thing, and then do that again. And gradually, what you'll find is you'll end up with the things that are genuinely important to you, right? And then you can sort of then go, okay, so what from my perspective, it would be negotiable in a role. And what that allows you to do is then start reflecting on your current role, but also, things for future as well. So if you're looking for a role, and it's really very helpful to allow you to start looking, but then also when you do take that next step and start having those conversations with people, you've already got a feeling in your brain of like, these are the things that are important to me, and I can talk about them and sort of gather information on them through that process. So that's the sort of thing that, I try and guide people on, but also, I do a lot myself, and that played a big part in, my recent, decision to move on from 1010 where I was at, and into this new role. So yeah, but I think, I think that there's different ways you can do that, but I do think it's important to take that time to reflect and really understand, why you may be feeling that way in a role, or what is important to you to help you then make some decisions, or have some conversations with people and guide those conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I say, that's an exercise we've actually done together, haven't we, Stu?
We did, yeah.
And there was also there was a similar exercise that I did years ago with Karen, which was just called clarity and contrast. So it's just very, very similar to Stu's example, really. But your clarity is all the things that you really, really do want in your ideal role. Contrast is the fun one, because that's all the stuff that you don't want, and that's just as important, actually. If you're feeling stuck and frustrated in a role, write down all of those things that are making you feel stuck and frustrated, because those are the things that you don't want. And I think the other thing I would say is that we just shouldn't filter ourselves when we're doing these exercises. So the more ridiculous it might sound, I would almost say the better. Just get all this stuff out, because I think sometimes it's the ridiculous ones that can be more telling and can sometimes actually sort of lead us more towards, what we actually might want. But I think also allow ourselves to be, I guess, ambitious, right? What I was putting down, back in 2019, it's taken me 7 years to get there, but 7 years of intent, but based on some ideas that I had back then, because I had no filter and I knew what I wanted to go for.
Yeah. I do think it's like you say, do it in a way that is unfiltered, because just allow yourself that freedom to just go, this is everything, right? And I think that's why I always say, do it in iterations of like, do that first time, you'll get a list of stuff, right? And then you go back and look at it again and go, is that as important as that, let's say, or is that as important as that? And the other thing to remember as well that I found over many, many years, almost 30 years of doing this now, it's like, oh my days, is those things change. What's important to you, what was important to me, say 10 years ago, is not so important to me now, right? So for some people, salary will be right at the top of that list because that is something that they absolutely need. As you sort of progress through your career, that may drop down. You may sort of say, well, actually, that's not as important. And that's, to be honest, that's quite a refreshing feeling as well, to sort of say, I can allow for a little bit of flexibility here because actually I want to do something more around this and I can take a little bit of a hit there. But obviously, everybody has those things that are most important, whether that be salary, whether that be, hybrid or remote working, whether that be. The one thing I will always say is we all do have to make some sort of compromise at some point, right? You really luck out and something ticks every single box imaginable, then fair play, right? But there is always something to compromise on. And I think that's why actually for me, when you're doing that exercise, those things that you're willing to compromise on are actually probably the most important and valuable things to understand so that you can then weigh things up more effectively.
Yeah. I mean, there's a really good quote I like. There's a guy called Jim Rohn who I don't think he's around anymore, but occasionally I see his videos pop up on YouTube, and a lot of them seem to be sort of videos from the 1980s or 90s, sort of old seminars. But a lot of his principles are quite, are still quite powerful. And one of the things he says is, if there's something that you want, you have to ask for it. Because he says most people don't ask, and that's why they don't get what they want. The point being is you can change your life by asking. Asking is, of course, the beginning of receiving. And he says if you don't get what you want, you get what you ask for. And I think that's a really important point. And it's not necessarily about asking within your own company or asking more broadly, but it's about being explicit about what it is that you do want, and what is your, I guess we're getting into almost like personal brand. What do you stand for? What are those things that are important, I guess, to us, and yeah, we can start shaping what we actually want by looking for it.
I think that's a really important thing you said there, Chris, because that then comes into values, right? What are our own personal values? So when I was saying about compromising, I won't compromise on my values, right? And I've left roles for that reason, because they have compromised, or they've tried. Let's say they've tried to compromise my values, at which point I've gone, no, see you later. So I think, I do like that. I just want to say though, if my daughter's listening to this at any point, just because you ask doesn't mean you get, right? I'm just gonna just putting that one out there, Chris. Don't trip me up here with my daughter. She'll be like, yeah, but Chris said if you ask. It's like,
Well, I didn't say when though. This is the thing, and I think this is a really important point with it as well. Is like you can ask for these things, but there's also sort of the kind of the law of gestation that these things don't necessarily happen when you want it. They happen, at the right time. A lot of things need to align. So yes, we can't be too impatient.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I think it's then thinking about, because obviously you said like you started thinking about sort of your direction and what, like back in 2019, for example, and feeling a bit stuck. And there is that sort of element of we need to be patient, right? Sometimes it isn't the right time. It might not be the right time for us, or it might not be the right time just generally because the role may not be there yet, or you may not feel quite ready to take that chance or take that risk or whatever that looks like. But I think coming back to what you were saying there about making still asking for what you want. To be able to ask for what you want comes back to knowing what you want, right? Or what you think you want.
Exactly.
So So I think again they sort of they go hand in hand, but I do think like it doesn't. One of the things I see now more than ever is people are really keen on progression, like quick progression, right? And I find that, I have a lot of conversations with people that maybe have come through grad schemes and stuff that sort of say, well, slow down a bit, right? Just allow yourself time to develop and learn and get some scars and, this sort of thing. Because it took me years. Now, maybe there was reasons it took me years because maybe I wasn't asking, maybe I wasn't quite ready or didn't feel quite ready, or maybe the opportunities weren't there necessarily, right? But what that's allowed me to do is that's allowed me to develop over time, build sort of more confidence, build more experience, lose my hair, get lots of scars, all these sort of things, right? Which ultimately allow you to just, end up being so much better in the roles that you want to do in the future. That's kind of how I look at it. So
Yeah,
I would
I really like
encourage
that.
people to, just take a bit of time as well. Don't rush it.
Yeah, I think what we're touching on here is around frustration, and I think sometimes, although it feels like a bad thing, it can be a very powerful emotion and something that can drive amazing change in our lives. Because it can sometimes be
Mm.
that we feel like we're continually pushing, and you've given examples there of grads that want to sort of keep moving up to the next level and to the next level, and real life doesn't continue as a grad scheme does, right? You do your 2 years in your grad scheme, and then
Yep.
the real world hits. And I think sometimes, yeah, we do come up against frustration, but I think it's important that we sit with that sometimes and we think, well, why am I getting frustrated here? What is
Mm.
it that I feel is holding me back? To think,
Mm.
well, what am I doing wrong? What could I do differently? Because one of the principles that I worked with Karen years ago was to say often that there is a reason for this frustration. Um, and one of the principles is life should be easy. And I know
Mm.
life is tough a lot of the time, but the point is that if you're aligned to your direction, if you personally are aligned with where you want to be, because we've worked out what we want and we're now trying to get there, that route should be fairly easy. But if you're hitting roadblocks, if you're hitting frustrations, then that's that opportunity to stop and think, well, perhaps that isn't the right path. What are
Mm.
the other paths that are available to me? And I must admit, at the times that have been, in my career, when I felt the most frustration, I've always looked back and gone, you know what? I'm glad that roadblock was there because it challenged me either to do better, to learn more, to grow, to try something else, or to
Mm.
look for other opportunities or to find things that were more aligned to what it was that I wanted to do. So there's been, jobs that I really wanted to get and I didn't get it. And it's hugely frustrating at the time. And then I look back and think, you know what? I'm glad I didn't get that role because actually that's not really what I wanted, right? If I go back to my clarity and contrast, if we go back to our negotiables and non-negotiables, there's a hell of a lot about that role that was falling in the wrong column, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's an important one. I think sitting with our frustrations and questioning it, and then thinking about how we can go about moving forward is really powerful.
Yeah, it is. And as I say, I think then actually have like what you the sort of the conversations that we've been having, so through the sort of the coaching sessions and actually reaching out to somebody to speak to about that, sitting with that frustration, but being able to share that frustration, I think is really important. And often in those situations, one of the reasons why you may be feeling frustrated is because you don't feel like you're being heard in the company that you're you're working with him, right? Maybe you don't feel like your line manager is hearing you, or you're not getting the right level of leadership or guidance, or whatever that looks like. So I would always encourage people in those situations to, reach out to others, right? And just sort of share how you're feeling, and maybe they've got some experience, or maybe they can just help guide you through those sort of more challenging times. So but I do agree. I think sitting with those frustrations allow us time to, again, reflect on things a little bit more as well. And I think that's what's a really important point. I think we should maybe talk a little bit about how the sort of the process that you went through and I went through to kind of get to where we got to, right, in terms of the roles that we've landed. It wasn't like, oh, snap our fingers and magically we've got a new role, right? There was a
No.
whole process around that we went through. There was decisions that we made, right? And that some of that started with, what does an ideal role look like for us? Or, but from your perspective, Chris, how did you kind of go through that in sort of in that start of that journey? Because I'm
Yeah,
interested
I
to
mean,
talk.
it started with frustration. Let's put it out there, right? So it did start with frustration that I didn't feel like I was getting where I wanted to get to. And I did exactly what you suggested, which is start talking to people. And I think we met, um, was it about a year ago? It was last summer, I think, at a Ministry of Testing event. I
Yes,
sort of
it
knew who
was.
you were from the podcast, so I thought, oh, I'm going to go and say hello, and we sort of got chatting. I
Do you
was
know what?
just
I'm
sort
going to
of
stop
telling
you
him
there,
all
Chris.
about.
I think you were probably the first person that came up and went, I've listened to the podcast and this, that, and the other. I honestly genuinely think you were the first person. That was like a little bit of a ooh moment, yeah. Somebody does listen, yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah,
It's kind
but
of my
sorry,
favourite thing now at these sorts of. It's kind of my favourite thing at these sorts of events. I often go up to people, go, "You don't know me, but,"
I've
which is a bit
stalked.
creepy in some ways, Yes. But no, it was all well intentioned. But yeah, I
Yeah,
mean that's just the power of community, right? And
it
Quality
is.
Talks is a community. We're both part of Ministry of Testing as well, another really powerful community. And that's one of the big powerful things, is that we're able to sort of reach out to others when we're in that space and go, look, this is how I'm feeling. These are the challenges that I'm facing. So yeah, we sort of had a bit of a chat. We had a bit of a back and forth on on LinkedIn, I think, and then eventually we sort of started talking more routinely or more regularly, because I had a sort of a clear aim of where I wanted to get to, and what I wanted to do, and we were able to clarify that together, weren't we? I suppose so. We sort of started on that journey together, which has been, it's been crazy really over the last sort of 9 months to a year.
Yeah, and obviously it it kind of went through stages, didn't it, of trying to look at why you were frustrated, how could we sort of figure out how could that be improved in the role that you were in, and kind of like then obviously built on and built on. But I think for me it was, as I said to you the last time we spoke, why I love doing the coaching sessions, obviously with you, but others as well, is I learn as well, right? And as a coach, obviously it's important that we withhold and we remove our bias and stuff like that. But the sort of helping and guiding people, you do learn yourself as a coach, right? And naturally, me going through something similar at the same time is a little bit like, oh, actually these conversations are helping me as much as they're helping Chris. This is great, you know?
Oh,
Um,
cool.
so yeah, so I think it goes both ways. But what point did you kind of get to that stage of like, do you know what, actually, yeah, I think this is the right time for me now to take that next step, to look for that new chapter, let's say. Was there any sort of moment of like something triggered, or was it just sort of like a catalogue of things over time? Because sometimes it does, doesn't it? One minute, like you can think,
Yeah, I think it was a lot of things. I think I'd spent quite a lot of time trying to evolve my role in the company that I was working for, and just wasn't finding the space to do that, and that's fine, right? And it's
yeah, absolutely,
it comes down to there's a lot of things that factor in whether a company can sort of cater for people wanting to sort of change roles. And it was still, again, a fairly small company, and it just perhaps wasn't the right time in terms of what I was looking to try and do, right? So that's kind of sort of how it was. But I guess I got to that point of kind of passively looking for a new role, but not. I wasn't sort of applying. I guess I kind of started to do a little bit subconsciously or without thinking about it, was I kind of started a marketing campaign. So rather than actually sort of going looking for roles, we'd spent a lot of time sort of working out the sort of thing that I wanted to do. But there were other things I wanted to do in the sort of the testing and the community space as well. So one of those was, I wanted to start a podcast. Sorry, not a podcast, a blog. Great to be on a podcast now, but I wanted to have my own professional blog, and that was something that I wanted to do for a long time, but I guess things like imposter syndrome and all these sorts of things were sort of holding me back. What have I got to say? So we put a lot of effort into getting that sort of started. It's been a bit quiet of late. I've got quite a few posts in the pipeline, as you know, Stu, because you've kind of reviewed a lot of them. So I do need to start again pumping some stuff out. But yeah, I got the blog online. I was sort of getting active with LinkedIn. MOT was particularly important, Ministry of Testing. So I got involved, became a chapter lead for the London events, which is great for visibility. So I started helping out with that. Conferences, I went to MotorCon, or the last Test Bash that became MotorCon last year.
It'll always be Test Bash to me. Sorry, Rosie. It'll always be Test Bash to me.
This is it. But again, at these sorts of events, I was making effort to go up to talk to people, not because I was looking for a role, but I was just wanting to sort of meet people that I'd sort of seen about in the community and sort of see what they were about. So putting myself out there, introducing myself to like the community organisers, the people that organise these big events. Went to Peers Con earlier in the year, did the same thing, sort of introduced myself to the organisers there as well. So I was just sort of putting myself out there and being quite public about what you came back to really is sort of values and sort of what I'm about and, my approach to things. So I was being quite public about that side of things, which, as it sort of turned out, started to bring opportunities towards me. So I was contacted a few times through LinkedIn with various opportunities, and the difference this time was because people had seen what I had been putting out there. They knew what I was about. So the opportunities that started coming forward were actually quite well aligned to what I was actually looking for. I wasn't too sort of active in that time in terms of applying for roles. I was just enjoying, I guess, just getting stuck into the community and just doing a number of things to, contribute back to the community that I'd wanted to do for a long time. And I guess, I put positive energy out there and it came back ultimately. So I'm very grateful for that.
I think that's an amazing story in terms of sort of, everything comes back round, right? And I think, building many years ago, somebody said to me, Stu, you need to build your brand. And I looked at this guy, Big Rich Thomas at EasyJet, and I looked at him and I was a bit like, you what? I'm not really sure what you mean there, mate, but now it's so, I mean, I say now, it's always been important, but Now that I feel like there's so many more ways we can actively go out there and build that brand, not because not as a, oh, look at me, I'm amazing sort of thing, but like you say, just going out there, connecting with people, communicating your values, putting posts out, coming onto podcasts, doing blogs, because people do see it, people do hear it, right? So then when opportunities do start coming up, things do almost like gravitate towards you a little bit more. And I think that's really important, right? I think the more active you can be, and it's not easy because we all have day jobs, we all have lives outside of work, and all these things take up a lot of time, right? Doing this podcast takes up a lot of time, right? Which is why we're expanding the team the way we are. But even if it's, you're able to, do one of all the things that we've been talking about, that's a step to sort of building a bit of a brand for yourself, getting you more well known and things like that. And what I think is really important in what you were saying there, Chris, and this is something that I've done for many years now, is be ahead of the game. Don't don't be reactive to, now I'm really frustrated, so now I need to go and find a job, and now I've got to do all this stuff. No, be proactive in doing those things. Even if you're completely happy in your role, you don't know what's around the corner, right? The amount of people that are just being made redundant at the moment, just like, it pains me. But it's important that you're always kind of preparing, for those situations, right? It only takes something to happen in your role to maybe for you to then question, is this still the right role for me? So kind of getting ahead of that game and starting to, connect with people, whether it be through Ministry of Testing, whether it be through the podcast, putting posts out, putting things out on, blogs or whatever, I think is really important. Because they do get heard, they do get seen. A lot of the recruiters will, see these things, right? So when roles do come up, they're more likely to come and go, oh, I remember this guy. His name was Chris Pratt, not that one, the other one. The more talented and better looking one, that guy there. I remember him saying something about, maybe I'll drop him a message to see what he's doing, So I just think it's so important that people are a bit proactive with it.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's an interesting thing you say there about, someone came to you and said, oh, Stu, you've got to build your brand. Because I think if you'd said that to me a year ago or 18 months ago, someone said, oh, Chris, you need to build your brand. I go, what the hell? Right? What's this? Because it wasn't sort of what I was intentionally sort of doing. But what I guess sort of happened was by trying to put together a blog and write an about me page and start crafting various posts, I found my voice. I kind of worked out what I was about. And I guess that was that first step for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously, imposter syndrome's a real thing, right? I don't care what anybody says, like whether you agree with it or you don't agree with it. Whether you've got a well-established brand, personal brand or not, imposter syndrome will always be there, right? Even if people know who you are, they know what you're about, this, that, and the other. So I think that's just something to be mindful of as well. It's just like, again, just because you have this brand, you're not guaranteed anything. So you still need to make sure that you are, presenting always in a good way. You never know when your next opportunity is going to come about and where it's going to come from. So always be mindful of that. Always, if you are, posting on LinkedIn or you are writing blogs, think about things, have an empathetic sort of, way to things, right? Think about things from different people's viewpoints and stuff like that. One of the things that I've found challenging is when I see people that are very, this is my opinion, this is how you should do it, this is da 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 da, da. And actually, if I'm recruiting for people and I see that sort of thing, it kind of puts me off a little bit, right? If because I'm thinking, well, are you somebody that is flexible? Are you somebody that can open their mind up to something slightly different? Are you somebody that can adapt and be versatile and and that sort of thing? So it's just something to also be mindful of, I think, when we're going through that process of sort of trying to build our brands up and doing it in the right way.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point, isn't it, Stu, about that sort of flexibility? Because I guess as we start moving into new companies, we're being faced with very different challenges, very different contexts to those that we would have been working in before. And I guess the point is, what might have worked really well at one company might not work so well at another company. And I guess, yeah, as we start, embarking on these new roles in the first few months, we need to start thinking about that, don't we? It's not so much, this worked well before, so let's do it the same way here. It's a bit more of a gentler process, isn't it?
It is. It definitely is. But that, I think that all starts in the interview process as well. So I think, during my interview process, it was a great process. The first stage interview, I met with our CTO, our head of engineering, and our head of learning and development, and we just had a really great conversation about so many things, right? And what I loved about that was that it really helped us kind of get to know each other and what we valued and what, the direction of the company and, and all this sort of stuff. But also it allowed me an opportunity to take the time to understand where they are, where Blue Light Card were at that moment in time. Try and understand what are some of the challenges they're having, what are sort of some of the problems that they're having and stuff. But also, for at the same time, then position myself in a way that I'm open to all these things, right? And I don't have a set way of doing things. I have ideas, I have frameworks that we could potentially utilize in solving some of these problems. But first of all, it starts with understanding what those things are and so on. So again, kind of like for me going into that whole interview process, the sort of approach was very much about trying to understand and be as sort of empathetic and open as possible, right? In terms of what could this look like, right? And coming back to does this role suit me from a sort of negotiables and non-negotiables perspective? Does it tick my boxes? Is it going to challenge me in the way I want to be challenged, right? Are there, is there anything coming out in the conversations that we're having that maybe go against my values or, are maybe quite not right in terms of what I'm looking for? So I think that whole interview process before we even get into the organization is the time to really kind of obviously sell ourselves, but not do it in a way that's like, look at how great I am. This is more like, look at how sort of open I can be. Look at how versatile I can be. How I can adapt to different situations based on the need of the business. Rather than going, this is how you need to do it, and that's the only way. So yeah, I don't know about your thoughts on that, Chris. During your process, what you kind of how you approached it and what that looked like.
It was a very similar sort of discussion, and I think also it was very two-way. It wasn't that I was trying to tick all their boxes. I was trying to understand, does it tick my boxes as well? It was very much a two-way process. I wasn't considering myself in any sort of rush to move, which is a fortunate position to be in. I was quite happy with my previous role. I could
Yeah.
continue for some time.
I was the same, to be fair. Yeah.
Yeah. So for me, it was very much a two-way discussion, and I was very sort of open at the beginning because I was going, it needs to be, the right thing. I'm not the sort of person that likes moving companies very often. If you look at my history, I don't move very often, so it needs
Yeah.
to be the right thing. Moving roles for me is a really big deal. So yeah, it was a very sort of open two-way conversation, and yeah, as in the same way I was sort of very honest and upfront about sort of myself and what I was offering. I was very grateful that the company, were very, very honest as well from their side, and I know they are because I can see that now since I've been there. So yeah, I think that's important, isn't it? It all starts at that interview, and we start to understand the attitudes and the sort of those values and where the company wants to go. But yeah, working out exactly how that needs to be done is that process, isn't it? And I guess there's some sort of methods and techniques we can use to start learning,
Yeah.
but then how we progress to then sort of start making change needs to be sympathetic to what we've kind of learned, I guess, rather than necessarily trying to go, yes, this worked here, so we're going to do the same thing, which can be quite harmful, a bit alienating, I guess, when you're joining existing teams.
Yeah, it definitely can. And I think that's that's a mistake that I've made in the past, and I know a number of other people that have sort of gone from one leadership role to another leadership role have also made in the past, because that's where you feel comfortable. That's where you feel like, I can showcase my confidence by doing these things or saying these things. Say, for example, in the interview, right? It's like, this is what I've done before, and actually that's great, but that might not be what's needed. So,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
we need to be a little bit more open-minded around that, and really start with understanding.
It's an interesting point though on confidence, because I think sometimes when we start a new role, it almost from internally rather than necessarily from external pressure. Sometimes we feel like we've got a pressure to act and a pressure to do something, to be seen to be doing something. And that's almost, I wonder actually whether that's confidence or a lack of confidence, right? I think if we're confident in ourselves, we shouldn't feel an unnatural pressure to like prove ourselves. We should feel confident
Yeah.
that actually, the early days of joining a company is much more about learning and understanding and appreciating the landscape. I don't know what your take is on that, Stu.
I mean, it's a really good point. I definitely think it varies in the sense of there's sort of what you end up perceiving the expectations of the role to be versus what are actually the expectations of the role during those first sort of few weeks and months. And I think, again, what you do often find is, especially when you come into a leadership role, there is this self-made pressure to show impact, right? Show impact, and like, oh, I need to implement something, or I need to change something, or I need to do something that's really visible, right? And that's not always the case, I think, and again, to me, that's really important to ascertain that in the interview process, right? So, for example, in my final stage interview, I had to present on what the first 90 days would look like in the role. And it was a great opportunity. And I'd love to see people doing this more to have that discussion, right? So here's the sorts of things that I'm thinking about would probably be a good sort of approach to those first 90 days, right? And there's books out there. We all know that there's books and that you can read and stuff like that. But again, I think it's, by doing that, you can then have really open discussions around, does this, there you go. See the first, look, for those that can't see it, Chris is actually holding up a book called The First 90 Days. So I think using that as an opportunity to kind of go, in the first 90 days, this is the sorts of things that I would be thinking about doing, to gather more information and start, doing whatever. And at that point, obviously you can start gathering insight back as to whether that would be the type of expectation. And I think that's really valuable, because if you can gain that sort of insight during the interview process, it takes some of the pressure off from starting. Whereas, if you sort of don't have that insight earlier and you land, you can naturally put that pressure on your own shoulders. The key thing is, keep talking, right? Keep speaking to your line manager, keep speaking to your senior leadership to say, how am I doing? What is your expectation? Am I sort of delivering the sorts of things that you expect me to be delivering in my first few weeks of the role, right? And don't be afraid to ask for feedback during that time. And that's key. But I think the key thing for me is, like, if you can get to a point during the interview process that gives you some sort of insight, that can take some of that pressure off, I think.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think, it is just understanding, the brief, isn't it, from leadership and what you're moving into. Some roles you could well be moving into somewhere where the world is on fire, and you need to be acting in powerful ways to start with. In other contexts, things are going along okay, and that they want you there to help improve things. They don't want you there to be tearing stuff down just because you don't like it, I guess. So yeah, I guess we're getting on to that sort of first 90 days then Stu. So I guess you've entered into these sort of change periods in companies more than I have. This is kind of my first role, and I was looking at this book, Michael Watkins' First 90 Days, before I started, and I've been sort of rereading it again more recently, even though I'm sort of into my first 90 days, and I feel like, even though there's things sort of in here that I feel I ought to be doing or haven't done yet, I don't think it necessarily matters that I haven't done them in my first 90 days. I think it's just important to use them as pointers, and I can apply them at the right time. But what's your approach then, Stu? So, day one, how do you go about it?
So day one is probably the most important day. Make sure you know where the toilets are, right?
Yes, and the coffee machine.
Coffee machine, and that sort of thing. But no, I mean, like, all joking aside, I think sort of that first sort of couple of weeks for me is just about meeting people, getting to know people. And I'm not just sort of saying, like, oh, I now know your name. This is more about spending genuine time with people to have a conversation with them and, like, get to know them. And understanding who are the sort of those people that you are going to be interacting the most with over within the role, right? On a day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month basis, and proactively get time with them and introduce yourself and take that time to kind of have conversations, and even if it's not kind of about work, just on a more sort of lower level, more of a friendly sort of approach to things. So sort of like how I kind of break things down in sort of like the first 30 days is kind of like, obviously, understanding where we are and understanding the history of the business and, that sort of thing, getting to know the world that I've stepped into, essentially. Focusing on building relationships with people and taking time to really do that, right? And obviously then sort of thinking about, getting a feel for, obviously we work in tech, right? So what's our technology, who are our customers, all this sort of stuff that ultimately will start helping you kind of shape a bit of a picture, right? Shape a bit of a picture of the business, our customers, the world in which we currently live, why we currently are in where we are. Is that good? Is that bad? Where are people's heads at? How are people feeling? But don't try and sort of do too much too soon. For me, it's just about gathering information, and in those first sort of couple of weeks, 30 days, to then be able to kind of go, okay, I've got a better feel for where we are right now. I've got a better feel for the people that I'm working with, right? I've got a better feel for their experiences and maybe why they may or may not be resistant to some of the change that may need to happen, right? I may need to spend more time with this person to nurture them more because they've been burnt by this sort of thing before, versus somebody else that's like, yeah, I'm well up for this, right? Let's do it, right? So that for me is kind of the key thing. Once I've found the toilets and the coffee machine, that's when I start doing that. And you can structure it, you can kind of, put some real sort of detailed structure down and keep a track of who you've spoken to and sort of like the conversations, or you can just do it a little bit more organically, right? And allow it to just be more natural. It's entirely up to whatever works best for people. But again, going into those conversations with no bias whatsoever, right? Going into that information gathering with no bias whatsoever. It's like, I'm a clean slate here, right? And I'm starting
I
from
guess
scratch.
we're trying to understand a lot of the why of the way things are, aren't we? Really. So it what we don't want to do is come in very gung ho without appreciating how things have got to how they have been. And I guess sometimes there's a temptation, isn't there, when you enroll to spot things that don't look right, and you're trying to secure those quick wins. We want to show some impact, but actually sometimes it might be best just to leave these things until we kind of understand how they got to where they got to.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's really easy to see the what. It's not easy to understand the why and how they got to where they are, right? And that is actually the really important thing. We can be really reactive to the what, and I've talked about this on the show before about, somebody might use a certain term or sort of style of language that like makes you kind of shiver, right? Because it's like you associate that with a bad thing. Well, actually, it might not be a bad thing. It might just be how we talk in within the teams and stuff like that. And that's fine. So I think it's really kind of just taking that time to build that empathy, build that understanding, so that you can talk to people on level terms, right? And also the other thing is really important is it allows you to start understanding how you start, and we've talked about this, how you start meeting people where they are, right? So rather than sort of thinking about, all this stuff needs to change. So it needs to go from here to here. And those people that are listening on Spotify or whatever can't see my hands, but, from left to right, i.e. from A to Z, right? Really quickly. And actually that's not the case. We have to nurture people through change, right? And sort of being able to do that and sort of meet people where they are. Okay, so currently we use this terminology. Okay, we'll keep using that terminology. What it means beneath the surface is what will change, right? And then we can kind of guide people through that and try not to change too many things too soon. So as an example, going into BLC, one of the things that was coming out in lots of conversations was we don't have enough or we don't have any automation, right? So that a lot of the conversations that I was having with people were when we started talking about quality or testing, that was the go-to conversation. However, over time, over sort of the time that I was having these different discussions with people, one thing was becoming more evident that we weren't ready for that either. We weren't ready to jump straight into the world of just throwing automation at everything. There was foundational pieces that we needed to sort out. There was cultural things. There was mindset. And that's really kind of what we've been focusing on, right? So whereas you might go into another organization and that may be okay. And actually it is the more technical and tooling side of things that are missing. Like culturally and the mindset may be great, right? That may be in a good place, but it's the tooling that's wrong or the technology that's holding you back. So I think it's important to always have that open mind of you're not always going to be starting from the exact same place every single time, and be comfortable with that.
Yes, I think that's one of the most important things, isn't it? It's being comfortable with being uncomfortable, being comfortable with being in the unfamiliar, I guess.
It is, yeah. And being versatile enough to do that. So obviously, you coming into your role, Chris. You obviously it's like you said, it's a brand new leadership role, right? In terms of coming into it, how have you felt stepping into that role? Sort of, what does your sort of day one and beyond look like coming in?
I think what I've stepped into is very different from what you have, and I think that the context is kind of important. The size of the company is important. So I've joined a fairly small company, and I was their first QA hire for some time. So I was sort of stepping into a world where they had some immediate problems or challenges around QA and testing and building that up. So I was fortunate that there was a lot of alignment technically with my new role versus where I was, that I was actually able to step in and start providing value by just getting hands on and doing some testing straight away. And I guess the challenge which I've kind of felt is trying to balance, getting on with the day to day with the stepping back to go, right, okay, so, what is the more strategic piece that we need to look at here? And we're sort of getting to that, I would say, which is why I'm sort of having another look at the first 90 days. I guess, we have grown a bit even since I joined. We've had a new team member join with us in QA, and that's really helped. Not only with sort of giving us a bit of capacity, but also it gives me someone to bounce ideas off as well, to look at how we can progress and grow things going forward. But yeah, I think one of the other things is, I've been brought in as a QA lead, and a lot of the expectations there are more, I'd say, sort of traditional, I suppose, from a QA perspective. But certainly during the interview process, we did talk quite a lot about quality engineering, and it's certainly an aspiration that we will start working towards that. However, I think the difference between where you started and myself is that you stepped into a company that had a QA function and that was already rolling, whereas I didn't have that. So it's a very different starting point, and I think there's an important checkpoint for us, which is to be more established in terms of QA before we then start working more towards QE. I think it just talks to the point that you've mentioned already, Stu, about meeting people where they are, meeting existing expectations before we start introducing broader ideas which may be a bit more unfamiliar. So, I guess that's how it's been for me. And yeah, that the challenge will evolve over time. But I'm certainly really enjoying it at the moment, and there's plenty of space to sort of grow, and we can start trying new things as we go forward.
Yeah, I remember when you phoned me. I think you phoned me, or I can't remember if you phoned me, video called me, or what it was when you said you'd been offered the role, and sort of just the excitement that you were feeling at that point because it was something new, refreshing, and the sort of a brand new role in the company. I mean, actually, the role that I've stepped into even though there has been a QA function, this is a brand new role as well. So it is a quality lead role that they've never had before. So there is still elements sort of that shaping the role as you go as well. And I think that's something to always be mindful of if you're stepping into a new role. There's a lot of unknowns that you need to just sort of balance out and get comfortable with. And again, it comes back to what you were saying earlier about what are the expectations of me when I first land, and how do we deal with that? So yeah, I mean, we've been talking for over an hour, Chris, and we've got so much more we need to talk through, right? I think
there really is. Yes, we've barely got started, if we're really on this.
Yeah, I think we've barely got started, and I think we can. I think what we should do is we should think about wrapping this episode up, because I think we're at a really good point where, what we've talked through is kind of going through that whole process of starting to feel like maybe a new chapter might be on the cards, or wanting to move, and what that looks like, and how you can get comfortable with that, how you can kind of become more familiar with what's important and what's not important to you, building a brand and getting proactive with that, and interview processes. And we've started to step into landing in the role, but there's so much more that we are going through right now, that I think we roll into another episode. What do you reckon? Keep people hanging.
Absolutely, I think we could carry on for hours, couldn't we, Stu, as we tend to in our conversations. But as you say, I think we've got to a nice point here, haven't we? With that sort of getting out the starting blocks when we're actually into the new company and where we go from there. So I think that's a good point for us to pause.
I think so. I think so. Yeah, and hopefully when we get the big Geordie back as well, obviously he can start sharing some of his sort of stories of landing into a new role in a brand new industry that he's never worked in before as well. So yeah, I mean, he's got the title of head of. We've just got quality lead titles. I mean, and that's something actually I want to talk about in the next episode around, when we talk about what's important, because I've had people sort of messaging me saying, "Oh, see, you've taken a step back. You're just a quality lead now." I'll save that one, people, for the next episode. We can get into that a little bit more, but yeah, I think we're at a good point to wrap things up. And Chris, obviously this is your first official new co-hosting episode. How would you feel about wrapping things up? I know I'm putting you on the spot here, my friend. Would you want to wrap this one up for me?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's been a really interesting talk. We've sort of started, as you say, we clarified what we want from our roles, what we don't want. We talked about clarity and contrast. We talked about our desirables and our undesirables. And then we've talked about putting it out there. We've talked about how important it is to ask, right? And how important it is to make it known what it is that we're actually looking for. We talked a bit about, connecting with communities, right? We've talked about the Ministry of Testing community. We've talked about PeersCon, the community around that, and of course, Quality Talks itself. These are all opportunities for us as testers to or quality professionals to talk to each other, to share ideas, share frustrations, I guess, as well. And we've looked at how actually amazing opportunities can sometimes come out of our deepest frustrations. So I think there's been a huge amount there, and as we've started to sort of move into, well, how do we deal with these challenges of starting a new role? I think that's a good point to wrap up, and we can kind of pick up from there in the next episode. So, yeah, I've got to say thank you to Stu, I guess. Thank you for inviting me onto the podcast and bringing me into the podcast family. And of course, thank you to everyone for listening. Do drop us a comment, a like, and if you haven't, subscribe. And we will catch you in the next episode of Quality Talks.
Take care for now.